CrossWorlds character spread is the absolute antithesis of the 2010s, and it validates my long-term investment in this franchise's greater world. I think it's pretty damn good. This game's roster is exactly what I've wanted out of the spin-offs, but we can all agree there's potential for even more Sonic characters in this game. I have good reason to believe that there will be more Sonic exclusive characters, and there's potential for more updates and season passes given this game has had a surprisingly positive reception so far. It's doing shockingly well on the PlayStation and Steam charts. A lot of people believe all of the remaining characters will be crossovers, but we need to acknowledge that there's still 12 characters left to be shown across both free updates and paid DLC. The paid DLC is almost guaranteed to be crossover IPs, but the free updates seem to be Sega characters exclusively. And I actually prefer the free characters, ironically. Looking at the facts in front of us, it would be real easy to assume the rest of the characters are also just general Sega characters. We more or less know that II and Knights will be in the game. They're pretty much confirmed, although you could predict that pretty easily. But there's a shockingly high amount of unrevealed characters. Given that Sega has been investing in Sonic's greater characters and lore a lot more lately, I don't think it's out of the question to get even more characters from his universe in his own game. Live service games like Sonic Forces Mobile, Sonic Blitz, and Sonic Rumble are embracing and monetizing the niche parts of the franchise in an exciting way. So why can't CrossWorlds do the same? Just because it's trying to appeal to the broadest audience? That would be such a waste of a Sonic game. The way the Sonic community is nowadays, I bet they'd really appreciate bringing in literally anybody from Sonic's past, even someone like Elise or Sonic Man. Having more characters in the game post-launch would generate nothing but positive press, in my opinion. Even the crossover picks that are already confirmed are going to regularly enter the game after launch, keeping the casual audience engaged, so why can't we do the same for the die-hard fans? Without a shadow of a doubt, I'm pretty damn confident that Tangle and Whisper are gonna be in this game. They are by far the most requested characters I've witnessed. If you don't agree, I'd love to hear examples of characters people are asking for even more, because every time this topic is brought up, they're the first names I see in my comments and unrelated threads online. They're a pretty easy pick for this game too, considering they're some of the only new Mobian characters in our current age of Sonic. Sure, we've had Trip, Gadget, Infinite, the Conductor, and Styx, but most of those characters are one-off appearances. Tangle and Whisper are already established modern-era mainstays. I think they're pretty likely considering the free updates represent Sega characters. And I'm not trying to be cheeky and say, technically Sonic is Sega. No, there's an actual reason for this. Jakks Pacific handles a lot of merchandise for Sonic, mainly action figures. The main Sonic line of toys includes basically every character you could ask for, similar to CrossWorlds. Jakks' roster is exclusive to those who've appeared in the games, TVs, or movies. Meanwhile, in the general Sega line of figures, we have Tangle, Whisper, and Metal Virus Sonic. Interesting, isn't it? Tangle and Whisper also have plushies, blind bag keychains, and official renders. There's also an interesting trend where characters will get a toy from Jakks Pacific, then shortly end up in Sonic Forces Mobile. Maybe it's because those characters now have an updated official model. Examples I can think of are Tangle, Whisper, Mephiles, Infinite, Metal 3.0, and Neo Metal Sonic. I believe these characters will be announced post-launch or very close to it, and that being said, most of the work on post-launch characters is probably done already anyway. This has probably been a long time coming. Another point I'd like to make is that every single character in CrossWorlds has a special color palette you can use to personalize their vehicles. Interestingly, Tangle has a rather fitting palette with a Noah character already attached to it. According to a Gamescade stream, there's also an unseen extreme gear with a rather specific pattern on it. It's even called the Wispin Booster. We also know there's going to be a Sonic Racing CrossWorlds one-shot from IDW, and in one of the variant covers, you actually see Tangle right there. This comic is going to release in December, and again, we know that update characters are coming out after release. Interesting timing. It makes the most sense to include these lovers. They were designed to fit in with the game since day one. Whisper is built off the aesthetics and world of Forces, with all of her abilities coming from existing Wispens. Tangle is a simple design with a fun personality that kids can attach themselves to, and her abilities are basically intended for swinging around parkour levels. You can tell the team working on the comics have always had a thing for trying to convince Sega to canonize this stuff ever since the Archie days, and we're finally living in a timeline where this is canon. Archie and IDW have historically been overlooked by fans and Sega alike, but with Sonic's resurgence these past 3 years, we've seen an overwhelming amount of normalization among the community in regards to IDW's place in the canon. When Frontiers was new, I barely saw any IDW discussion, and absolutely nothing prior to that. Ever since Frontiers acknowledged that Sonic has a continuity, and also restored a lot of people's faith in the franchise, we've seen a golden age of interest in the comics. I'm not saying the comics have been totally ignored, otherwise they wouldn't have been in print for nearly 20 years now, but it was like finding a needle in a haystack whenever I tried finding Sonic fans who knew about the comics. This is a big era for Sonic comic enjoyers. Several key players who contributed to Archie and IDW have been hired onto the main franchise. Tyson Hess, Ian Flynn, Digiman, and Evan Stanley, just to name a few. Their involvement has manifested in a lot of shocking things over the years, such as improved characterization, an action focus for the franchise, returning characters such as Sonic the Fighter's cast, the Witch Carters, the Battlebird Armada, and of course their involvement also brought the acknowledgement of obscure lore in past locations. I think it would only be fitting for IDW characters to make an appearance in this game, almost as a reward for this team's years of effort trying to course correct the franchise with a good blend of new and old. Their efforts have been acknowledged numerous times by Sega of Japan, and Tangle even got a mention in Frontiers. I think that we're just on the cusp of these characters making their way to a game. It also feels like a silly spin-off racing game is the perfect place to introduce these characters to the general public. This game already has a lot of characters that newbies aren't familiar with, so why not go all out at this point? It could really expand people's interest in the franchise. And this way you can casually implement them into the game universe without having to dedicate a portion of a new game's plot towards explaining who these people are. It wouldn't take focus away from a potential new story just to establish characters that have already existed for nearly a decade. You can give the IDW cast small dialogues in CrossWorlds that casually clue us in. It would feel pretty natural in my opinion. Now, an even bigger elephant in the room. Surge the Tenrec. She's a much more important character than our favorite lesbians, and because of this, her inclusion feels very uncertain to me. Surge is a character that needs to be introduced with a certain level of depth and respect. If done haphazardly in a racing game, it could be pretty underwhelming, unlike a casual inclusion in something like a mobile game. I can't really get into Surge without spoilers, so here's your chance to skip ahead. Surge is a character who has been literally kidnapped, brainwashed, cybernetically enhanced, and killed multiple times. She is trying her damnedest to find a path other than destruction currently in the comics. There's some real tension between her and the main cast that would be entertaining to explore in this game's rival interactions, but they'd have to do it right. Not to mention the fact that I don't really know what's planned for her in her future. Is she going to break and become a mega threat again? Are they going to save that reveal for an official game? Is she going to be completely redeemed eventually? Is she always going to exist? Or is she going to disappear like Starline? She's entirely unpredictable at this point, and that's really cool, but I personally want them to keep her as a villain while still allowing me to care about her in an empathetic way. It's a lot to balance. So I wonder how they would choose to immortalize her personality and growth in CrossWorlds, considering we're at a very interesting point in her character arc. Spoilers out of the way, she's complex. She's basically in the middle of her character arc like many past characters once were. The difference is that those characters are more or less established now and have time to goof off in spin-off games. Their character arcs are over. I'm not saying she couldn't be included, I just wonder if this is something that Sega even wants to tackle. Gameplay is always going to trump what the writers have cooking. I'm just curious what's happening internally in regards to Surge. Surge is definitely more popular than basically every other IDW character, but I wonder if she's at a spot where she is ready to make her game debut. We already have destructive characters like Zaz and Zavok playable, so hey, why not, right? You might also assume Kit would join Surge, considering she considers them a package duo, but real-world circumstances can always get in the way of that, so I'm not really counting on him. Other than those 4 characters, I don't think anyone else is particularly likely for CrossWorlds. I don't know, maybe unless we got a specific IDW DLC pack. Mimic would look cool, but I personally don't think he's fleshed out enough to really deserve a spot just yet. You've also got to consider the fact that we just had a Sonic Riders arc in IDW, which gave entirely brand new designs and extreme gear to each of the aforementioned characters. This doesn't particularly hint at anything happening in CrossWorlds, but the timing is very convenient, and I feel like it might have been slightly intentional on the comic team's end. It's kind of a strategic way to get fans to campaign for IDW in the games, and hey, I'm down. I'd also like to add that IDW has been cleverly using Vector, Amy, and Tails racing vehicles as casual transport in the comics. This reaffirms the racing game's place in the canon, and reminded me these vehicles have purpose outside of the spin-offs. That's some real neat and subtle advertising for the racing game if you think about it real hard. I also believe that Sonic characters have significantly higher chances of getting voice lines than the crossover characters. We don't know how many people are on the writing team for this game, but it would be a lot of work to make 2 different rival dialogues for every single crossover character, and also make it feel accurate. Hey, how would you even write dialogue for Joker and SpongeBob? Sonic is the focus of this game. It would make complete sense to give Sonic characters special treatment. Especially if Ian or Evan is working on this game's writing, because they could handle the IDW cast just fine. I think the most exciting prospect of this concept would be the fact that we would get official voices for these characters. I think everyone already has their own idea of what these characters sound like, but having something tangible and official makes them feel that much more important to the overall canon. It's fascinating how far the comics have come. At one point, they were mocked for being weird. Now their best concepts are making it into things like Shadow Generations. Abraham Tower's name and relationship with Team Dark are basically entirely lifted from the comics. The comic team deserves representation in this game, in my opinion. I feel like IDW has done a lot of positive press for Sonic in between all these large projects. And as a big fan of the comics, it would probably just warm my heart to see these characters jump from a page into a fully animated and voiced video game. I already think it's so cool that you can find these characters on store shelves. If you like what you heard here today and don't want to send me death threats because I like IDW characters, consider checking out Dolphin's Best, a playlist with my personal favorite videos. I promise I'm not a narcissist, it's just easier to name it that. I like to cover platforming content, both fan-made and official, and I'll be yapping about CrossWorlds as much as I can. This game has had my brain firing on all cylinders as a lore enjoyer, and I want to get my ideas out there.